Welcome to the Justice Journal podcast. I'm Sacramento County District Attorney Anne Marie Schubert. I hope you enjoy this podcast series where we discuss important public safety issues and provide insight into who we are as an office and what we do both in the courtroom and in the community to provide the highest level of public safety through prosecution, prevention, and innovation.
As part of Human Trafficking Awareness Month, this podcast discusses the issue of human trafficking in Sacramento County. I'm joined by guest Sacramento County Deputy District Attorney Danielle Abildgaard, who was the human trafficking prosecutor at the time of this recording, but has since been reassigned to another unit. I'm also joined by our current human trafficking investigator, Annette Fucles, and victim advocate, Bea Lavrov, as well as Sacramento Police Detective Jason Collins.
I'm going to have my guests introduce themselves, and then we'll get right into the discussion.
My name is Jason Collins. I'm a detective with the Sacramento Police Department. I'm also attached to the Child Exploitation and Human Trafficking Task Force with the Federal Bureau of Investigation.
Bea Lavrov, Human Trafficking Victim Advocate with the District Attorney's Office.
Annette Fucles, DA Investigator, Sacramento County District Attorney's Office, assigned to the Human Trafficking Unit.
Danielle Abildgaard, Deputy District Attorney, Human Trafficking Unit.
So let's dive right in. I'm going to start with a very basic question. What's the difference among human trafficking, pimping, and pandering?
So under the penal code, human trafficking is actually broken up into three different subsections. But in regards to the human trafficking that we usually see here at the District Attorney's Office, the cases that we usually prosecute, we usually handle the sex trafficking. And so under the law, human trafficking of a minor, we have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant, the suspect, did cause, induce, or persuade or attempt to cause, induce, or persuade a minor to commit a commercial sex act with the intent to pimp or pander them. And if they're an adult, we have to prove that, but that it was done by force. And that's very general speaking. Where pimping and pandering, the code sections, the elements of the crime for pimping are that somebody knew, that the defendant knew that the individual was a prostitute when the prostitute did commit sex acts, that the defendant took the money from those sex acts in order to support themselves. Or with the pandering, it can be kind of simplified with they are recruiting somebody to work for them as a prostitute. So those are the differences between the human trafficking and the pimping and the pandering regarding from the penal code.
How does human trafficking differ from human smuggling?
So essentially, somebody could be smuggled but not trafficked. If they are brought into this country, they may have been smuggled over, brought over, and are free to go about their business and live their lives. On the other hand, if they are trafficked, you can be smuggled and trafficked. But if they are trafficked, that can happen domestically, that can happen as a result of smuggling. They are not necessarily one and the same, nor are they always mutually exclusive.
What are some signs that may indicate that someone is the victim of sex trafficking?
Your ID, not in possession of your documents, looking away, maybe not interacting. One of the stings we did in Sacramento County, we encountered a sex worker who we were talking to and trying to help give her resources. But when the detectives were asking her for her identification, she didn't have it. Her pimp sent her actually a screenshot of her identification, so that she could show us that was her real name and date of birth, but she didn't have possession of her identification. And that's really important because if you think about all the things that you need to have your identification for as an adult, if you're banking, if you're traveling, moving about, it's really important for you to have that. And if somebody else is controlling that can make it very difficult for you to move about.
Right, or leave a situation. With our minors, a lot of the time we will see that all of a sudden they have something new that their parents haven't purchased for them, or if they're in a foster home, group home, wherever they're at, that whoever their guardian has not purchased for them, like a new phone, if they're constantly getting nails done, hair done, but they don't, have a job on their own or getting money from somewhere. And the other one that was pointed out to me actually recently by a defense attorney who said, well, and don't forget what's not happening, that they're not showing up at school. Because that is a tell sign as well that, if the kids aren't going to school, well, where are they? What are they doing? Where does the pimp or the trafficker have them?
So they could be living at home and
So-
this is happening?
Yes. They can be at home. They could have a family with, both mother and father at home, and this happens. It can happen to anybody, and we've had some of our minors from pretty much every single school district here in the county.
It's right under the nose of teachers and parents. And
Absolutely.
A lot of the recruiting is done through social media, whether it's Facebook, Snapchat, Instagram.
okay.
And we've had minors that, going back to talking about being at home, we've had minors that were living at home, would hop in an Uber that would be sent by their exploiter and to take them to a date. So parents had no idea. They would sneak out after hours and off they would go.
Where does human trafficking occur? Is this typically in your suburb areas and in the downtown areas, or?
Everywhere. It is absolutely everywhere. And a lot of people say, oh, I live in this small county. It doesn't happen there. Oh, it does. It absolutely happens everywhere.
And with social media, I guess that's the point, is that it reaches everywhere. It's not within a jurisdiction.
Yeah, it's very far-reaching. Working with the FBI, I work with other outside agencies, and I've done operations in Roseville, Rockland, places where you would think that this type of activity doesn't occur.
Did you want to add?
Well, and I was going to say, with the social media, it really gives the trafficker or the pimp another tool to control them, because they will say things like, well, if you don't do what I ask, or if you don't make this amount of money per night, or you don't bring in another girl, then I'm going to post all these naked pictures of you for all your family to see, because he has full access of her social media, of her cell phone, everything, because she will give it to him because she thinks she's in love with him.
And I also want to say the way in which it can start are just simple comments. So let's say the teen is on a particular site. It might start with, oh, you're really pretty, and engage in sort of that kind of conversation. And then it just take off from there, where you think you're having a relationship with maybe someone who's the same age as you, or maybe you're mad at your parents. I know that exploiters have talked about exploiting that very thing. Oh, I see that you're ranting about not getting along with your parents, and that might be someone that they tend to target.
We just did an episode on social media safety awareness, so it all kind of starts the same way then, right? Target somebody, grooms them, that kind of thing.
Correct. I think there's a common misconception, and people get hung up on the word trafficking itself. I know when I first got into this unit, my idea or vision of trafficking was the movie Taken with Liam Neeson, where his daughter was abducted, thrown into sex slavery. But what we see here locally, and I think what happens domestically, is that it's really just prostitution on various levels, whether it's street prostitution, whether it's online escort ads, massage parlors, what have you. When we talk about the word trafficking, that's what we're really talking about locally.
Why don't victims of trafficking run away? So for instance, we talk about a lot of the victims are living at home, go to school, they have lots of opportunities to tell somebody. Why doesn't that happen? In some cases anyway.
Primarily, a lot of the exploiters prey on the fact that these victims are looking to belong, looking to be loved, looking to connect, and feel like they're part of a family or part of a relationship. And it can start out with the emotional manipulation of nobody loves you like I love you, no one will take care of you the way that I do. And a lot of them may be coming from family situations. Even if they live at home, maybe there's neglect, maybe not. But at the end of the day, that can turn into the threats, that can turn into coercion, and that exploiter will play whatever role they need to play to keep that victim with him or her. But they feel like there aren't options. They're taught that they can't trust law enforcement. They can't trust other adults. Similar to what you see in domestic violence relationships, where there's a lot of isolation that happens from support people in a victim's life, you'll see that in human trafficking as well. So they feel that nobody will understand. There is a sense of shame. As Danielle had said earlier, if they're threatening to expose them on social media, there are so many things that keep them there. We had somebody that recently testified and said she would rather be anywhere than a group home. That was why she stayed.
Wow. We talked about this happening everywhere, and I assume that that means different socioeconomic, different family situations. Is there a typical victim, though? And when I say that, I mean, is there an age range, boys, girls? Is there any sort of profile in that regard, or same thing?
It's really across the board. But I think in our unit, we typically see if it's a juvenile. I think the youngest we've had is 14. Is that right, Danielle? And then with young adults, so like 18 to, I'd say, maybe 23, 24.
And there's certain risk factors that we see more often than not. Low self-esteem, come from broken homes, prior sexual or physical abuse. Those are all risk factors that make the victims more susceptible to the exploitation. And like Bea had said, these guys are master manipulators, and they look for whatever that need is that maybe the victim is looking for, and they'll exploit it.
It's a lot of, if you loved me, you would do this for me. And it usually starts that you'll just have to do it one time. And after that, you won't have to do it again. Well, after she does it the first time, he's gonna say, well, you've already done it, so let's just do it again. And they will say, the pimps have told us, one of the detectives, now a sergeant that we work with closely, he did an interview one time, and they said to him, we know if we can get her to do it one time, that we've got her locked in.
And I guess, too, that plays into, well, you're kind of in this now, so it's harder to get out.
That's
once they
exactly
start
because they lose their self-esteem.
And it's a relationship.
Self-respect.
And it's part of a game, too, is that we're going to build something together. Like, you just work and we can stack money, or that's the words from that part, but stack money or save money in order to buy this
beautiful
grand house and those sorts of things.
Cars,
and I
boats.
do want to be clear that exploiters can be male or female. And even in our office, we've had cases with both male and female exploiters. And that process is still the same. It's still that grooming. It's still trying to belong to someone, a family. Hey, come with us. So it's still part of the same thing. So it doesn't matter if it's a male or female.
And I think women would be trusted even more.
Yes,
So maybe more.
That is correct.
Yeah. And a lot of times, the relationship part will escalate into violence, and they'll use violence or fear or coercion to keep the victims in that situation.
Do you think at that point they know that this is not good? This is something that they would eventually need to escape, or do they still have that? I'm going to stay.
I think it's a little both. I mean, I'm sure they feel that this is not a good situation, but I think they also feel they're stuck. That there's no way to get out, or there's not a where are they going to go to, especially if they're going to come from a broken home. It's not like they have a support system that they can escape
What's the
to.
other option for them?
Right. And I think that's a lot of times what also keeps the victims in.
Right, and not wanting to talk about what they've done, that they have sold their body to strangers 10 times a night in order to make him money. And so who wants to talk about that? And so they feel stuck. I can't go home and tell my mom because I feel so bad about what I've done. Or I can't tell law enforcement. I can't tell my teacher because, they're just absolutely humiliated in what they have done.
I don't want anyone to know.
Exactly, so it's easier to stay.
Yeah, and if you don't stay with that exploiter, what we also find is victims move from one exploiter to another, really looking for someone to be nicer, because now this one exploiter is, causing you great harm and maybe beating you severely, but then the next exploiter comes along and he or she is nice for that moment. And it's sort of back to that same cycle of grooming. Hey, I'll take care of you. Hey, we'll build something together.
And then the same thing happens.
And the same thing happens.
And in this lifestyle, they really push this idea of loyalty really hard. And so in addition to making them feel isolated from others, you are taught to have loyalty to whoever your exploiter is. Sorry. You are taught to have loyalty to whoever your exploiter is. And I've sat in on several victim interviews where we have somebody that's saying that they've had these horrible experiences in childhood, suffered great abuse and maybe never really told anybody about it until they meet this exploiter. And he has taken such a great interest in them and wants to know everything about them. So if you disclose to me something horrible that happened to you, and I'm the only one you've ever shared that with, how do you feel about me? You're going to feel connected. You're going to feel loyal. You're going to feel that there's a bond now. That trauma bond is very real. And so those exploiters know how to manipulate that bond and know how to use that to keep them there and keep them under their thumbs.
When a victim is made contact with, whether it's part of one of the stings or in some other way, are they forthcoming? Do they lie? Do they self-identify as being a victim? Or does it take a few times?
I'd say it takes a few times. They don't typically identify as a victim, nor do they tell all of the story. We always say that, we're planting a seed, and, we offer the resources that we're there. I wouldn't necessarily say that they lie. I would say that they withhold. And we're just trying to, when we encounter them, treat them with great dignity and respect, and try to, build from there. Because I think it's a big deal just to meet a stranger and then, tell everything. Now, there are a couple of occasions where we have met victims as part of a sting, and they have, opened up quite a bit. But that might be the night where they've kind of had enough. That might have been the night where they suffered some great harm or great disrespect, and they're kind of ready to talk. But usually it takes time.
They have significant trust issues. And we have, in fact, one of our cases that recently he pled to a human trafficking charge and went to prison. He did his own, and this is what he called it, a public service announcement, where he had recorded on his phone and was sending it to different girls what would happen to them, what little thing would happen to them if they were arrested for prostitution, and what huge bad things would happen to him if they told on him. And so when he was very direct with them, you just own what you did. Don't say anything about me, because these are all the things that can happen. Because again, it goes back to that loyalty. And he referred to it himself as a public service announcement. Yes. And so that's one of the ways that he continues to control those girls and women and just say, hey, if you're going to say anything on me, I'm going for the rest of my life, which is not true. But if you just, keep it yourself and say you were out there working that night, you're only going to get, this amount of time.
Yeah, so oftentimes it's really important to rapport build with the victims, and Bea and I have gone and done victim interviews where the interview itself lasted about an hour and a half, but maybe there's 5 or 10 minutes worth of actual content pertinent to my case. But the rest of the time we're talking about food and movies and just trying to build a good rapport with the victims, especially the juveniles. And so the next time, that just builds that little trust, that they might be able to open up with us, and we've been pretty successful with that.
So once you make that breakthrough, does it kind of all come out, or does it still trickle out?
It's still got to draw it out quite a bit, but like I said, they'll give you more, and eventually you'll get to that point where, for me, I have what I need for my case, but I think too they open up enough to give their story.
I think that's one of the things we focus on when we teach law enforcement how to investigate these cases, that they have to redefine success, so to speak, to know that this is not going to be the kind of interview you get everything out of the victim the first time. You have to show them some respect and some dignity and let them steer the conversation, let them direct it, so that they see that they have some control and that you're not just trying to use them for information, because we take so much from them with cases, with interviews, with the lifestyle they lead. So many people take so much from them that it's about empowering them to kind of steer and speak ideally at their own pace about what happened.
And I was going to say, the thing I also found that is important is to for law enforcement to do what we say we're going to do. If I tell them that I'm going to check on a resource and get back to them, it is really important that I check on that resource and get back to them. So it's just really important to, in small ways, be very truthful with
And building the trust and the
building the
relationship
trust, yes.
on the positive side.
even if it's not the thing that they want to hear, it's still the
Right,
truth.
Right. Annette, you mentioned a little bit, but if somebody was just out and about shopping, what are some red flags? And I know even myself, I don't really pay attention to people around me or what's going on, but are there some red flags that might be a sign that someone is a victim of human trafficking?
I'd say watch out for someone who's looks like they're being controlled. If there's a dominant figure that's controlling every aspect of what a person's doing, you'll see in this lifestyle, you'll see the girls looking down at the ground a lot. And we talked about, what happens if, how do they change from one exploiter to another? There's a rule out there that if you're out on the street and you make eye contact with another exploiter, then now you kind of become their property, and it's a strange world, strange rules. But that's just one of the things that you have to look out for. But what we see is that these guys control almost every aspect of these victims' lives, and so how you could see that, is one thing, but that's something to keep an eye out for.
Probably putting pieces together, and also them not being allowed to answer questions. So you might ask them a question, they don't answer, they don't say anything, and the person that they're with is the one who speaks. And I know that we've talked to the Department of Justice, their attorneys, and they work on a lot of labor cases, and it's the same thing. The exploiter is the one who speaks, even when the question is directed at the victim.
And I would also say time of day. If it is during school hours and you're seeing what Jason just talked about, and you're thinking, well, this child should probably be in school. So I see that they're not in school. There's year-round schools, or somebody could be homesick. Something could be going there. But that's just one indicator. And then you're looking to see, there's the controlling that's going on, and she's not talking. Okay, hang on a second here. So time of day matters as well.
In terms of law enforcement, I think the everyday person probably would not pick up on those things because they're not looking for it. But for law enforcement, are they looking for specific things? Because they are probably more aware of these. Like what might catch their attention?
Right. So this year, I put together a human trafficking block at our in-service training for all our officers, and one of the portions of the class is talking just about that. And so, in terms of, I speak a lot to patrol, and in their case, you could throw out an example like, okay, you make a traffic stop, and you have, I'll just use a male as the person who's driving. Then you have two females maybe sitting in the back of the seat of the car, and they're dressed very provocatively. And maybe it's super cold outside, but the clothing doesn't match what the weather says. And the IDs for the two girls are, up with the driver. There's all these little red flags that if you, in and of themselves, don't really say anything, but when you start piecing them all together, should raise some question about what's really going on.
Unusual, right?
Right, and when they look at them to identify them, if they're at that point in it and they come up as missing persons, obviously that's a huge red flag for them that, okay, now the dynamic has kind of shifted here a little bit. Mm-hmm. This is what we've got going on.
Do they ask some certain questions?
Yeah.
Just because if you're, I think, again, going back to the being sensitive, and I mean, they probably don't go right at them. I mean, is there sort of like a way that it's best to sort of talk to them?
So in a situation like that, I think it would be ideal to separate all the parties and then start asking them the same questions and then see how their answers either match up or completely don't match up at all. And that'll kind of give you an indication on what's really going on.
How often, or do you guys ever see sex traffic victims become exploiters?
Well, I would say that some end up becoming exploiters by becoming recruiters for the exploiter. I think when we're talking
force, usually, or
manipulation by some means, whether it's by force, by love, by trying to please the main exploiter. We've seen plenty of cases where there's someone known as a bottom girl, and she's going to be the one that's recruiting and enforcing the rules and doing a bunch of stuff on behalf of the exploiter, the pimp. However, the female exploiters that I've seen come through our caseload did not initially start out as victims themselves of sexual exploitation. They went straight into pimping and pandering and human trafficking themselves. They didn't initially start out that way. But you will often see, as I mentioned before, that these exploiters will pick someone from among the ranks of women and girls that are working for them and make that one the enforcer at the bottom.
Kind of along the lines of, how does a victim end up being an exploiter? It just kind of made me think of when I talk with public groups sometimes, one of the questions is, well, don't the girls just want to be out there? I mean, aren't they doing it on their own? And what happens is at some point, they were initially manipulated, most likely, into doing this. If they've been in the life for quite a while, then that's a lifestyle that they know. That's a way that they know to make money. And a lot of girls do it for survival because they have no other means of making money. And so it gets to a point where maybe on the surface it looks like they're doing it on their own, but really it's just a means of, eventually they were manipulated into get into the life. It's the life they know, and then at some point it becomes a survival technique.
I can imagine that that's deep what they want to do, especially when they're a young person.
Right.
That's truly what they want to be doing.
What child grows up thinking, I can't wait to do this with my life?
Exactly.
I don't think that's the norm. And I think there's, being part of that lifestyle, being exposed to it, having your identity wrapped up in it from a young age for a lot of these women and girls. But I think there's also the realization that you can make money pretty quickly. And you've already sacrificed so much and you're already used to doing it. And so even if somebody is working without an exploiter, this is how they know how to survive, as Jason said.
And their self-esteem is probably affected.
Right.
Right. And we recently had a victim tell us, when we asked her, how did you, because she got out of the life on her own. She had the help of another girl who was out there working, and actually the pimp helped them, her pimp. But anyways, when we said, how did you do it? Why did you do it? Why did you leave? And her response is, because I wanted to get my self-respect back.
Wow.
So we are part of a collaborative court that's called RESET. So it's Reducing Sexual Exploitation and Trafficking. And so what happens is somebody who is arrested for prostitution will plead to the charge and then will be given a sentence, but that sentence is suspended. And they have the opportunity to complete our program, which is working with CASH, Community Against Sexual Harm, doing at least 25 hours with group counseling, one-on-one counseling, learning different things about, well, you explain it better. I'm losing it on this.
They cover some things in their classes, like I think there's seeking safety, there's healthy relationships, health in general. They cover a lot of different things. They try to do a very broad overview about living a healthier lifestyle, I think, overall. And they also have them work one-on-one with peer counselors. And so the thing about Community Against Sexual Harm, about CASH, is that most of the staff are survivors. So that adds that other element to our collaborative court, that they've got survivors that they can relate to, that they can learn from, women that have been there, done that, and gotten out, and have the wisdom and the experience to pass back on to the women currently going through RESET court. And so once they do all that,
once they successfully complete that, and we understand there's lots of setbacks for them if this has been their main financial, their main way to get money, and all of a sudden we're saying you can't do it anymore. That's very hard. So we anticipate and absolutely work with them when they do have, when they step back. But once they are able to successfully complete the program, we dismiss the charges against them.
Is there any follow-up in terms of when they leave then they're out of the program?
There's not any court mandated follow-up, but a lot of them still will go back to CASH and work with CASH, and usually rely on CASH to help them. When they're thinking about going back into life, if they're looking for resources or just need somebody to go talk to. So they do, they spend a lot of time there even after they complete our program.
And we've seen women that come through Reset and end up leaving, potentially having found a legitimate paying job, or some of them even enroll in school. We've seen some, 20-somethings that sign up for college classes and things like that, or finish their GEDs, whereas they wouldn't have done that for themselves before.
Right, and cash helps them with all of that.
Join us for our next episode where we continue our conversation about the issue of human trafficking and focus on the role of the victim advocate.
Thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoyed this episode. You can find all of the Justice Journal podcasts on our website at sacda.org, iTunes, Google Play, and YouTube.